Fantastic. So Annette, it's a few minutes early, but I know you well enough to know you don't mind and that you're prepared and all the rest of it. So
if I can live up to that.
yeah, colleagues, I'd like to introduce Annette Hay, who is leading our second workshop on mentoring and sponsorship, a topic we've been discussing quite a lot throughout the day. So Annette works in research services at Coventry University and has over 30 years of proactive engagement and leadership in championing equality in local, national and international arenas. She is recognised for her strategic influence and input into the university's policy, practice and external engagement. She is a member on numerous boards, including the US-based National Association of Diversity Officers, Association of Research Managers and Administrators, Coventry City Belgrade Theatre and Coventry University's EDI Council. We are so privileged to have Annette with us today, and I know that you will find her session invaluable. Annette, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. So my first task is going to be to share my screen. So let me know when you can see it.
You can see.
Yep, it's there. Thanks, Annette.
You can see the screen. Right. Well, interesting, sorry, but it's not showing up. Are you seeing the whole screen? Oh, that's it. Now you can. Is that okay?
Yeah, you can see the whole
screen. Okay, thank you.
screen.
Sorry, it wasn't showing. I've got two screens, so I couldn't see. Thank you. Okay, so hello and welcome to today's workshop, or my workshop on mentoring and sponsorship. My name, as Marcia said, is Annette Hay, and I'm going to be facilitating this session. As you already know, we only have 30 minutes for the whole workshop, so I'll do a brief presentation first. But as this is a workshop, I was hoping to try and make this a bit interactive and have a bit of a discussion. I recognise it might be difficult in the format that we have, so Marcia, you might have to represent the people in terms of the comments and the discussion that I'd like to have, because you know I know a lot of people come to conferences and they want to engage in discussion, so you may have to represent any of the comments and questions that come in. I'm not sure how we can do this, but I'm sure we'll work it out. So I'm just going to move straight on to my next slide. So firstly, I'll quickly run through this short agenda. I'm going to start with a brief introduction, and then I'll follow this with a quick look at a couple of simple definitions on mentoring and sponsorship. Then I'll briefly cover why I think mentoring and sponsorship can be a useful and meaningful activity for all career researchers, early career researchers, but in particular those from the Black and global majority. And then hopefully ending with some time for us to have a short discussion or chat, as I said, via Marcia. I apologise for putting you in that position, Marcia, on some of the concepts of mentoring and sponsorship. And perhaps some of you may want to share your good and not so good experiences, as well as any thoughts you might have on the anticipated barriers, challenges and opportunities, taking into account, as Marcia said, some of the discussion that took place earlier this morning on the panel session, but also in the chat. So just a brief introduction about me and some of my experiences and insights into mentoring and sponsorship. So I'm of African Caribbean heritage, but have lived in Coventry my whole life. And I've been working at Coventry University for nearly 15 years now. My primary role is in the research office as a senior manager, but I've also been extremely active in working towards becoming more strategically engaged in so-called senior and leadership level conversations, working towards making my institution and the higher education sector in general more inclusive and more equitable. Amongst other things, this includes me sitting on a number of committees, which Marcia already alluded to, locally, nationally and internationally, one of which includes my position as chair of the Race Equality Council at Coventry. And throughout my working life, in and outside of higher education, I have been a Black activist ever since my teens, following in my father's footsteps and those of our family ancestors, with my first experience being as a member of a local Black women's organisation called Asaba Women's Centre. And the rest, as they say, is history. Now, ever since joining Usaba at 17, I have had access to a wide variety of mentors and sponsors from all sorts of backgrounds, often without knowing, that they were mentoring me or sponsoring me, to be honest, and most of whom have come about without any formal arrangements. These exchanges and experiences were often for short periods of time, but I would say that time has been well spent so far, albeit not a solution or end goal in itself. And now, after becoming an activist at such a young age, I later did my undergraduate degree at the University of Warwick as a mature student nearly 25 years ago. And many, many years later, I completed a master's degree at Coventry University. And then somehow, and don't ask me how, I started a part-time PhD. And again, that was at university. Coventry University, sorry. Over this period of time, slowly and increasingly, and especially since working in higher education, I have found myself on the other side of mentoring and sponsorship, that is, actively and purposefully mentoring and sometimes sponsoring colleagues, students and academics from the Black and global majority in particular, informally and formally, and often by chance and without any formal recognition. Not that I needed it, but I know this is one of the ongoing challenges in the sector in terms of the unpaid and unrewarded labour and work that many of us from the Black and global majority find ourselves doing. Not for personal gain, but because we feel so passionately about supporting our students and peers, even if at times this has come at some cost, personal cost. And whilst it's always a pleasure and an honour to feel like you can do something for an individual, and sometimes someone who was previously unknown to you, it can help build their confidence and your confidence. It can help reinvigorate their motivation, or sometimes just provide reassurance by confirming what they already know. It can be a mutually gratifying and rewarding experience that both parties can benefit from. However, I recognise for the Black and global majority early career researchers, there can often be some very complex, nuanced and perplexing situations which arise from the systemic, structural and individual acts of racism and microaggressions that they experience throughout their early careers in research, and which over time can then negatively and unfairly impact their research goals, working relationships, career prospects, and general well-being. Now, there are literally hundreds and probably thousands of different kinds of definitions and descriptions of what mentoring and sponsorship are and mean. But for the purpose of today's workshop, I've chosen just these two definitions, as they're brief, succinct, and hopefully self-explanatory and easy to understand. And whilst there are some obvious similarities and crossover in some of the delivery and methodology of being a mentor or a sponsor, there are some very key differences between the two. So for the purpose of today's workshop, the definition for mentoring that I chose to use is one by David Clutterbuck, who says that mentoring involves primarily listening with empathy, sharing experience, usually mutually, professional friendship, developing insight through reflection, being a sounding board, encouraging. So from this statement, you can see that mentoring is a reciprocal activity between two people, whereby the mentor's ability to actively listen are critical, and the ability to establish and maintain a rapport is especially important for truly meaningful mutual exchange and understanding. And whilst the mentor can be friendly with their mentee and vice versa, the mentor does need to maintain a certain level of professionalism in order to be able to provide objective and constructive advice and guidance, and to help navigate sensitive issues and matters of conflict, and in order to avoid finding themselves in compromised situations. Then there is sponsorship. According to the Chartered Management Institute, choosing to sponsor someone means becoming their advocate, both in public and behind closed doors. This could be anything from championing an individual for promotion to getting them on the books for a conference presentation. So as opposed to mentoring, whilst there may be an element of mutual engagement, The sponsor often will have made a decision to actively choose to work with a particular individual based on the sponsor's own knowledge, experience and perceptions of an individual's potential. And not to say that they won't even have their own business and personal reasons to want to invest their time and effort. And unlike mentoring, in order to benefit from and achieve the desired impact and preferred outcome of sponsorship, sponsorship does not always require the sponsee to be physically present or actively participating in regulated conversations, such as you might expect when mentoring. I'll talk a little more about this in the following slides. So why do I think, have I gone? I need to go back, I think. All right, sorry. So why do I think mentoring and sponsorship are particularly relevant, useful and potentially so important for early career researchers from the Black and global majority? Well, amongst many of the things mentors can provide their mentees with enhanced personal development and progress, whereby they can share positive reinforcements, give constructive feedback, offer non-judgmental advice, and direct their mentees to resources and networks which can help support them to improve or whatever skills or area of knowledge, for example, they want to learn and build on, helping them to identify realistic and meaningful goals for improving their personal and/or academic performance and outcomes. The mentee should feel confident that their relationship with their mentor is safe and that any communications and meetings that take place are mutually agreeable and take place in emotionally and physically safe spaces and places, whereby both parties feel able to speak freely, openly, honestly, and most importantly, confidentially, without fear of disclosure, humiliation, judgment, or repercussions. When mentoring works, it works well, and it can help improve a mentee's personal outlook, self-reflection, and growth. And as previously mentioned, it can increase their productivity, attainment, and outcomes. The mentor should ideally be able to empathise with their mentee on a number of different levels, which in each case will be different, but one of which for many, not all, from the Black and global majority, is that their mentor's ethnicity, heritage, and cultural beliefs and insights may be well aligned with theirs. Mentoring can help build and reinforce resilience, fortitude, and character in a mentee, so that the mentee can become more robust and steadfast when faced with dilemmas and conflictual situations as they embark on their early career research as researchers. Over time, a positive mentoring experience can engender more insightful decision-making for the mentee and empower them to be their authentic self, whilst constantly stimulating and enabling more purposeful, creative thinking and innovation. A mentor should be able to help guide their mentee into making good, appropriate and timely decisions or take timely actions in order to help develop their resilience so that they may rise undeterred from their low points, but also own and unashamedly celebrate their highs. Sponsors, on the other hand, can significantly widen and increase your networks and connections, and can even go as far as to highly recommend you to people who would be positively helpful and useful for you to know and engage with. Sponsors can open doors that might normally be closed to you, and they can create opportunities that would not normally be or readily come your way. They can facilitate and stimulate higher visibility of you as an individual in terms of your personal attributes, skills, and potential, but also your research, materials, projects, ambitions, and profile. A sponsor will actively go out of their way to champion you and/or your work with the sole intention of not only positively influencing you, some of your choices and your actions, but also with the view to positively influence others in your favour. This can and often does take place in on and off the record conversations and communications, in meeting rooms and social spaces where you may not even be present, but where you become a positive element of conversations that take place at a more senior and/or influential level. A sponsor will earnestly and passionately encourage you to step up to perhaps unforeseen opportunities, and then sometimes step outside of your normal comfort zones into unfamiliar territory, but with their backing, support, and endorsements where needed. They will enable you to further amplify your voice and research with a view towards assisting in any ways that they reasonably can to achieve your best potential. This may not always be your fullest potential, but it may be the best that you can achieve in the circumstances you find yourself in. I say this because I believe that the sponsee is not just receiving what the sponsor gives, but that the sponsee is a constant and active participant in their own destiny and choices. And most noticeably, a sponsor can elevate and escalate your career prospects, your profile, and your reputation as a researcher, drawing attention to your best attributes, skills, traits, aspirations, and potential. And one of the most powerful and memorable times, I mean, one of the things I'd like to hopefully for us to touch on at the end is maybe talking about who are sponsors, because I recall earlier that people were talking about sponsors in a similar way, actually, to allyship, as if they're predominantly white. And I know not everybody was saying that, but certainly for me, I feel very strongly about being a sponsor as a Black person, but also receiving sponsorship from Black people, as well as white. And one of the most powerful and memorable times when somebody sponsored me that I will, and it was only for a short time, but it was very impactful, that I'll never forget, was when I met somebody called Kumi Naidu. Now, if you've never heard of Kumi, you can Google him later or quickly now whilst I'm speaking, because I'm sure some people have got multi-screens and phones and things. But Kumi Naidu was the head of International Greenpeace. And to cut a long story short, I met him at a conference many years ago. It was a conference where there was, I think, nearly 1,000 people present. There was literally like a handful of non-white people, Black people that were there. Kumi was the closing keynote speaker. I'd never met him before. When he was leaving, he saw me and an African sister talking, and he approached us and hugged us and said hello and said, look, I can't walk past you, you know, amongst all these sea of white faces. I want to come and just, you know, hail you up. Anyway, we exchanged contact details, and for the next 2 years or so, we just emailed maybe twice a year, if that, but he always replied. And then one day he was coming to England and he offered to come to Coventry University. So he came for a couple of days and he presented at some events that we had. He came to the BME Staff Network and did some speaking events, etc. And he did this at no cost. And I was so grateful. He had some very important meetings with the senior leadership. And when he left, I said, oh, thank you so much, Kumi. You know, really appreciate it. You don't know me from anyone. We met once like 2-3 years ago. And he said, Annette, you're my sister. And he said, I came here. The only reason I came here was because of you. He said, I don't care about the university or anybody else, but I can see that you're a sister, you're a Black sister, and that you're trying to do something. And I know that me being here and me being in the role that I have, that your leadership will take notice. And so that was really a powerful moment for me. And I also have to acknowledge my favourite and most esteemed and valued sponsor, who I'm sure is listening in now, and that's none other than Professor Gus John himself. And so I've been fortunate to have two, you know, more than two, but certainly two very important Black sponsors in my life. Now, with that said, becoming a mentee or a sponsee can take place by chance, as I've just said, on an informal basis, or it can be a planned and formalised activity. It can take place over a short or a long period of time, and it might require somebody with specific subject knowledge or certain skill sets, or probably more likely a combination of both to a greater or lesser degree. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, and there is obviously far more to mentoring and sponsorship than my time today will allow me to explore. So as I conclude, it would be good to hear, you know, in the chat, if it's possible, and perhaps from Marcia and others, to hear about your views and comments on what, you know, what I've just said and what I've talked about, but also from the discussion earlier. And I've put up here, so in the context of, you know, the Black and global majority, does it matter who the mentor or sponsor is, and if so, why? And, you know, I've made some comments. I made some notes earlier of some of the comments that were in the chat. And I saw some people were talking about whether, you know, the impact of having a Black mentor or sponsor or not, and some positive and negative experiences. So like I said, it'd be wonderful if people would pose some questions and some comments so that we can perhaps have a conversation about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Happy to monitor the chat. And when people start posting comments or questions, I'll be happy to share them with you. And it's great, we have time for discussion. We've got another 15 minutes or so. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so Emma says, I believe it does to a great extent, i.e., if you can see it, then you can be it. However, the mindset of the mentor is most important, regardless of colour, gender, etc. Someone has liked that comment.
Yeah, I think it's I think the mindset is important, but again, that's why I said there's no one size fits all, because I know for some people, so at Coventry University, so for example, we have a formal mentoring and sponsorship academy. And one of the things that I actually, as part of this is before I was the chair of the Race Equality Council, but one of the things I fought for was they had various streams. They had it for gender, and I said, well, you know, I'd like to have one certainly for people from, you know, the Black and global majority. And we've had that, and certainly I've had, and not just me, that we've had a number of academics and non-academics that have asked specifically for somebody that is from the Black and global majority, over and above, for example, as a subject specialism, etc. And I would say that I'm a bit of a reluctant academic. I'm partway through a PhD, so I'm not an academic, but I actually have mentored and do mentor quite a lot and sponsor quite a few people that are academics, because sometimes it's it's about that relatability and the understanding, and not having to explain why and justify why you might be experiencing challenges or not feeling like you fit in.
Yeah, I agree. There's a really good question here from Mel Green, and I'm sure many people are wondering the same thing. What advice could you please give me about how I could go about getting a sponsor?
Wow. A sponsor, yeah, this is really interesting, isn't it? How about, I suppose, getting a sponsor, how it's happened to me, like I said, I've had quite a few sponsors, I'd say, in my life, and I would say, and I think I alluded to this when I was talking, that a lot of these things have happened, you know, inadvertently. I didn't actively realise what I was doing, but what happened is getting yourself noticed and putting yourself in places. So I didn't do this when I was doing it. I didn't know this would happen, but what I've noticed is when I've, so I volunteered or put myself in certain committees and boards and certain spaces where other people who have certain power or position, and that's black or white, it doesn't, it's male or female, but I put myself in those spaces and made myself known and made my opinions known. And what's happened is, over time, it doesn't always happen immediately. Again, because sponsors will often, they want to suss you out. This is why I said they choose. I feel like what's slightly different to a mentoring is a sponsor will be more choose is the wrong word, but they will choose who they want to invest their time and effort with. So it's something that happens over time. But so I would certainly say, and I say this to a lot of my mentors or mentees, I should say, that I work with, that, try and get yourself on committees or in spaces, present at, early career researchers present at conferences. Get yourself known and let people know what hear your voice.
Great advice. Professor Gus, I can see you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask Annette your question or comment? Lovely.
Yes, thank you, Marcia. It just occurred to me hearing Annette that I should make a comment that I might have made earlier today if there was time. And it relates to something quite important that Winston Morgan said, which I think it just went by the way as a comment, and it is this, that we as AGM people in positions within these institutions constantly get called upon to do all sorts of things which have nothing at all to do with our jobs. Nobody evaluates them in terms of pay and remission or those sorts of things. And we do them at a cost to ourselves. Winston used the example of, other people getting on with their scientific research or whatever it is, while somebody like him is expected, not least of all, by AGM people within the system to deal with their matters and whatever. I mean, for years, as Annette knows, I've been the sort of go-to person for every bloody woe under the sun. So, so what point am I trying to make? I'm saying that one way of sponsoring is to ensure that when we see that sort of thing going on, we not only give support to the individual involved, but make sure that the institution acknowledges and recognizes their contribution, which is devalued, not assessed, but still critical to the well-being of others like themselves. The way in which what we do in those capacities impact upon the wellness and well-being of other AGM staff and students is inestimable. So in one sense, one is both advocating for the individual, but at the same time making the institution understand that it has a responsibility to them and a duty of care towards them. And quite often, even when we ourselves call on that individual for some service or other, help with whatever, we add to the problem as distinct from standing up and saying that is a form of exploitation that shouldn't continue.
Spot on. Spot on. Thank you, Professor Gus. I've got a couple more questions. One from Donna Marie Holder. Annette, as a follow-up to your point about putting yourself in spaces, does the advice differ depending on the stage? Depending on the stage you're at. So for some of us who are at the very beginning, PhD stage, should we go for mentorship over sponsorship? And any advice on doing that? Example, cold calling, emails, etc. Networking at the best of times, especially early on, can be daunting, even when you're actively putting yourself out there.
I think I suppose so it depends on where you're at as well in terms of what you're hoping to achieve, so some people could be at the beginning of a PhD, but but that's maybe not what they want to sponsor for example. So even though they're in their early career. So I think what I would suggest is mentoring is probably the best place to start, because to be honest, sponsorship is when you're ready to either escalate your career, I would say. So if you're at the early stage of a PhD, I certainly would recommend mentoring first. And again, there's lots. I don't know what your institution's like. So I know earlier in the panel discussion and some of the chat that I was reading. So for example, there was lots of discussion about whether their people's professors or line managers had time or to mentor them. But you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to have an academic or a subject related mentor. it might be that you need them, but often, so for often, if it's about motivation, if it's about managing your, how you manage your workload and all sorts of things, or if it's something emotional, I don't know, you might not be an academic mentor or subject matter mentor may not be the ideal person. So use your staff networks if you've got staff networks. Talk to your peers, look outside, because the other thing is you don't have to have a mentor or a sponsor from inside your institution, and that's another thing. And unfortunately, I think somebody was talking earlier about the limitations for many of us working in some of our institutions, that we're very far and few between as the Black global majority. So certainly look outside of your institutions and look to other Black and global majority academics, networks, and peers. That's what I would suggest, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I think one of the things that has struck me is if you are after a mentor, if you want someone to mentor you, know what you actually want from that person. I've had people ask me, can you be my mentor? Happy to do that. But time's really limited. Okay, it really is. And so it's really important that when you do have meetings, that you get the most out of those meetings. So I think when you're going into that kind of relationship, you have to know how that person can help you and what you actually want from that person, and make it explicit, because maybe they're not the best person to help you in that regard. So it is about knowing what you want from that relationship, from that mentorship. And I think that's probably crucial.
No, certainly no. I couldn't agree more. And again, I think especially if somebody actively, because sometimes mentoring, like I said, it just happens, doesn't it? You don't even. I think again, somebody mentioned earlier that they were at an airport, or they sat in a bus station and they spoke to somebody, and just for that moment, they felt that they'd been mentored. That's fine. But again, if you're making it more formal, if somebody's actively looking for somebody to mentor them, then 100% you do need to have in your mindset a goal or goals of what you're hoping to get out of that relationship, and normally some kind of endpoint, Yes. So it's not something mentoring is not something that's supposed to go on forever. And you can negotiate that with your mentor and mentee between you. And again, to me, mentoring, somebody mentioned about I say somebody, sorry, because I did have their names on my slides. I don't know if it was Lorraine earlier on the panel, but we're saying how the solidarity and the hierarchy, whereas to me, mentoring is a reciprocal, equal, mutual thing. I know for other people, it might not feel like that, and that might not be their experience, but certainly I see mentoring as a equal relationship that you negotiate the terms or the boundaries, etc. and have some goals.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for opening this up and inviting comments and questions. And I think that, the session has been invaluable, and I hope you get a chance to have a look at the chat. People thinking about how this can help and further their career. So brilliant.
Okay, thank you so much, Marcia.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.